Welcome to this next session, a lovely fireside chat on a cold winter's day. You can imagine a fire here, sustainable wood burning away. So also welcome to Pinsent Masons. My name is Hayden Morgan. I'm head of our climate and sustainability consulting team and a partner here at the firm. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Dan Grandage with us today to share some of his insights into his long career in sustainability. Yeah, exactly. No. You need to stick with my haircut. It's much more durable. So anyway, so we've entitled this session "Waving the Magic Wand," and I thought about how we could perhaps represent this, and we talked about Harry Potter. But I got up this morning. I was thinking, I was rummaging through my daughter's dressing up box, and I actually found this prop. So just during during our session today, if ever you want to wave the magic wand, I'm going to put it here on the table, and you can rectify any.
Will you use that if I'm talking too much?
Exactly. We can use that. So there's the magic wand for you, Dan. So I've been working with Dan on and off for about 25 years or so now. Dan's been at the leading edge of sustainability and financial services. Dan is Chief Sustainability Officer of Investments at Aberdeen, the global investment company. Dan and I first started working together at the same firm back in the mid-1990s, advising clients around various issues on sustainability. And over that time, we've seen an explosion of regulation and interest in this space, which continues to surprise with its various twists and turns, and is becoming ever more sort of complex and difficult to navigate. So it's great to hear some of the sort of insights, hopefully, that Dan's going to be providing there. I would just say it'd be great if we could have some sort of interactivity from the audience. So scan the Slido QR code. That'll take you to a page where you can, if you've got the app, where you can submit questions to Dan or myself around anything with regard to sustainability. We'll have a go at answering that. We'll also leave 5 minutes or so at the end of the session for audience Q&A with the roving mics. And after this session, we're going straight to the coffee break. So, Dan, I guess a nice, easy opening. This is going to be more like Parky than Paxman, I think, right? So,
Good.
So, why did you decide to become a Chief Sustainability Officer? What was the motivation there? What led you here, sort of, in your career?
Yeah, thank you. And sorry, before we get to that, morning everyone, and thank you for the intro. I am very disappointed Pinsents haven't managed to arrange a fireside for our fireside.
I think the alarm would go off. So, but yeah, there we go.
But to the question in hand. So, I mean, as you mentioned, I've been involved in sustainability before it was called sustainability, and the first part of both our careers was very much focused on risk and environmental risk. We're involved assessing sort of contaminated land and those kind of activities. And I got involved because of a desire and a personal want to try and effect change and a genuine interest and sort of scientific interest in the field. But as you mention, over that time, it's evolved massively. And certainly when I left university, roles like this didn't even exist. And probably even the last 5 to 10 years, roles like this didn't exist. But it ultimately came down to a desire to actually affect change ultimately, both within my organisation, but obviously from a broader societal perspective as well, but also just to try and get in there and do something. I can see the challenges that our clients are having. I can see the challenges that my colleagues are having, and I know I can assist. So that was a big reason why I ultimately took the role. And I think, you know, what's interesting with the role is just how broad it is. You know, my kind of typical week will involve talking to compliance teams, investment teams, product teams, clients, policymakers. It's hugely varied. So personally, I get a lot of satisfaction from that, but it does also demonstrate how challenging this is as an area, because it touches on so many different areas that it's very easy to just run around in circles and actually not manage to achieve anything. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's entirely answered your question, but hopefully it's got us started.
Interesting to cover off some of these. So you sort of joined this this role to have impact and make that sort of have change for your organisation and beyond. Be interesting to touch to see how much you actually think you're having that impact and change, and what are the sort of frustrations as you see it, and what's holding back your ability to influence that change, whether it's something in organisation. We talked about the need for systemic change, and the fact that it's really difficult and challenging to all have that, and we'll touch on alignment of interest, but some of the sort of areas there.
There's a lot in that question.
There's a lot in that question, yeah. And it wasn't on the list,
So in terms of change and the impact of that change, if I just I'll unpack the question in multiple ways. So starting at an individual kind of within the organisation level. So again, when I first started the roles in Aberdeen, so I joined in Aberdeen just to kind of fill that gap in as well, actually, in 2013. So I was originally in head of ESG for real estate, and then moved into private markets, and now I've kind of moved into a central team supporting all asset classes. So just to give you a bit of an idea of that journey. But within that time, I have gone from kind of being the kind of who's that guy on the corner of the desk, what does he do kind of thing, to then sustainability moving into this almost like rock star territory and being put...
So you were Harry Potter underneath the stairs at some
I was
point.
literally Harry Potter under the stairs. And then we moved into this kind of weird rock star territory, almost like that everyone wanted a bit of sustainability, and it was put on this pedestal, and we always talked about integrating sustainability into the investment process, and yet we weren't doing that at all. It was put on this pedestal, and it was something completely separate, completely special, and now we're kind of unraveling that, and moving towards it genuinely being integrated and being part of the business. So that's kind of a bit of I know it's not directly answer your question, but it is the journey that we've been on, and I think it's a positive thing. And I think probably as an industry, and certainly from what I've experienced, we've moved from integrating sustainability into the investment process to actually genuinely integrating it into our business process and our business decision making, which is different and involves different people. And so just talking about your change, it varies hugely, actually, and it was interesting. When I took on this role, I had a conversation with a colleague, because I'd come from that real assets background and I was making direct change. I was able to, come up with a plan. I'm thinking of a retail park I was involved in, and we came up with a biodiversity plan. We had bees there. We were capturing honey. I was having a direct impact, but on one individual retail park, as opposed to now, I'm able to have a far greater influence from a higher level, obviously, but I can have a far greater impact and influence across a much broader area and across a far broader number of investments. And then when I look at from an Aberdeen perspective, the journey we've been on, and actually the ability for us to actually start to influence that change and actually direct investment to where it's needed, it has significantly changed. Part of the issue previously was we didn't know what that even looked like. We didn't know what we were talking about. We were talking same words, different language, or some other variation of that. And what has helped with this increasing regulation is that we are only just starting to actually talk about the same language in the same points, or in the same way. So that's quite a big positive.
That's interesting. From a sustainability professional moving into financial services, you're speaking a different language to the financial services edging towards sustainability. And I'm not going to use a taxonomy, but we've got a similar taxonomy now, not the European Union one with a capital T. Thanks for the questions, by the way. I think we're going to come on to this, but we can talk about it now, actually, in terms of the balance between the strategic aspects of your role with the various compliance, and that is the regulation and the increase there drawing attention away from that strategic goals and aims. And I guess, just as a sort of adjunct to that question, what are the challenges around some of the regulation? Is it actually helping to mobilise capital allocation to more sustainable activities, or is it actually hindering that capital allocation?
It's a really good question, and I think if I kind of reduce this to the last sort of 5 years, at various points in the last 5 years, I probably would have answered this question differently. There've certainly been points when I felt like regulation was holding us back, and I was essentially becoming an extension of a compliance team. And I know, peers who have left the industry because they were fed up of being the ESG police, as it were. So it has been a challenge. However, to me, it feels like we're starting to come through that. There is a little bit more consolidation, and I think what we've been doing within Aberdeen and within a team is actually certainly when SFDR came out, we were constantly buffeted. But I mean, there were so many changes coming through SFDR. It was almost weekly. There was a new clarification, which was a clarification on the previous clarification, which didn't clarify anyway.
No.
So it was a very confusing time, to say the least. And we were, you know, we and the wider industry were you know, knocked and buffeted by that. What we spent a lot of time is actually going back to first principles, and I've been working with the team on this, is that, okay, let's go back to core sustainability principles. What are we actually trying to do? And framing our entire processes and strategy around that, so that regulation is an outcome of our strategy rather than being driven by regulation, which is absolutely the territory we have been in and absolutely the territory the industry has been in. So that starts to allow us to genuinely affect change and actually use the regulation for positive aims. To answer your question in terms of is it doing what it's intended to do, it is a good question. And again, at various points in time, I have wondered that. If I step back and take a more pragmatic view, directionally, yes, it's positive. It is absolutely driving capital to where it's needed. Has it been a perfect piece of pieces of regulation? Absolutely not. Could it have been done differently, or could it be done differently? Yes, but broadly speaking, we are heading in the right direction. And what it's really helped with is starting to provide that more clarity and consistency of language. You know, there are words banded about sustainability, ESG, sustainable investing, etc., etc. They all mean different things to different people, and that's really quite challenging. I can be talking to you as a client, talking about sustainability. You're using exactly the same words, but they mean different things to you, and so that creates challenges. And that's when, in my imaginary scenario, you're an institutional investor. If we roll that out to retail investors, it's even more difficult for them to actually understand what we're doing. So it's not really that surprising there's been misleading claims, and it's not that surprising there has been challenges of greenwashing because of this language issue. So I think this increased focus and compliance focus on anti-greenwashing is actually a really positive thing, and it's forcing us to be more precise and more clear on what we're doing. And we've also spent a lot of time internally, from our perspective, creating our own internal taxonomy, so defining what we mean by sustainability, defining what we mean by sustainable investing versus ESG, and then thinking about what that means. And one of the pieces of, it's not even a regulation, it's a concept that's coming through in regulation that I'm seeing increasingly is around double materiality. It's not a new concept, but the phrasing of it and framing of it is new. And I'm seeing that's coming through not only in regulation, but through conversations with investors. And so just to unpick what double materiality means, so single materiality is obviously just focusing on a single issue, and that's more typically would be financial materiality, and that's looking actually at the impact of the environment and society on our investment. So it's just looking at it that way. Whereas double materiality is looking at both that aspect as well as the impact of that investment on the wider environment and society. So at that point, you're kind of trying to balance risk, return, and sustainable outcomes. So that framing is actually really helpful to have those conversations with clients, because some of our asset owners talk about wanting to make societal change and have sustainable outcomes, but actually all they're really focused on is the risk and return. And so that's helpful to have that framing. Equally, I've started to see a misalignment of interest between asset owners who want risk, return, and sustainable outcomes versus asset managers who are more focused on financial materiality and really focused on risk and return. Even if they're looking at environmental issues, they're looking at the impact on that investment. So there is a misalignment there, and unless we get really, really clear on our language, even in IMAs, right from the get-go about what we're trying to achieve, then we're going to have issues further down the line. And that flows right the way through to engagement activities and stewardship activities. You know, you could hear a lot of language from a stewardship perspective about we're engaging for change. Well, what do you mean by that? Are you engaging for change to change so that it improves the value, or are you engaging for change from a societal perspective? They're different things, and we need to get better at clarifying this. And this is actually, I think, why there's been this blue and red state US sort of backlash, because actually the red states, I think, are not that I agree with much as it's being said there, but there are some components of the argument that do actually make sense because of this misalignment. And I can understand why particularly when you're thinking about double materiality and you're talking about this trying to affect broader societal change, you can see why they're pushing back, because that's applying a political worldview that they may or may not agree with. So I can understand why they're pushing back,
yeah.
But it's interesting we're moving into that territory of trying to be much more precise.
Okay. We'll come on to the election outcomes
Yeah.
in the US actually at some point. I just want to pick up on some of these questions that have just come in. One is around the sort of use of data that you need on a regular basis, I guess, to make either investment decisions or monitoring the performance of investments. And then the other one is sort of the use of technology to make your job easier. And I guess some of that is around some of these themes you talked about, sort of transparency and alignment of interest and not inadvertently misstating or misleading investors. So we'll touch on that one. Another question, if I just wrap these two up, Baillie Gifford has pulled out of the Climate Action 100 and the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative. I think it was this week actually.
Yeah.
Have you got any views on that as well? So maybe just take the data one and the technology one and how it can help, but what are the drawbacks, the easy one, and let's not draw attention to Baillie Gifford, but some of the challenges around some of the commitments around the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative.
I'm actually going to do it the other way around.
Go on then, it's up to you.
Sorry. I'm not going to talk about Baillie Gifford specifically,
Sure.
but it does link to that point I was just making about this misalignment, and that's exactly why they've pulled out. So they pulled out because they were spending so much time arguing to red state attorney generals that it was easier for them to just pull away from that. Is that the right outcome? I'll leave that for others to decide. I'm not going to make some inadvertent announcement about Aberdeen's intentions, but I can see that. I can see how that's happening. But and I think particularly around Climate Action 100 and that collaborative engagement piece, that absolutely fits into what I was saying about the I can understand the argument that's being put forward. I don't personally agree with it, but I can understand the argument. So I think it comes back to this need for us to be more precise about what we're doing, about are we focused on financial materiality or are we actually trying to affect societal change? And how do those two fit together? And actually also, from an asset manager perspective, how on the one hand can you be arguing for broader societal change 1.5 degrees, on the other hand, when you're making investments, assuming that's not going to happen? So I do think we've kind of walked into this. So I think there is a need for more clarity. And I think all this regulation is helping that. But I do think we're at a point of not exactly reckoning, but the whole industry needs to grow up and actually remove some of the hot air that has been involved in the industry, I think, as we all know, and actually really focused on the material issues. Yep. Which brings me on to the second part of the question, or second question rather. I mean, data is key, and obviously we use it throughout our investment process. I think there is absolutely a place, though, particularly coming from us as an active manager, for that bottom-up research and that active overlay, and actually truly understanding your company and your stock or your asset. That has to sit on top of that data. So for us, the data is a starting point, and then we use our own bottom-up research to supplement that. What I do think is the likes of CSRD, which, for those who don't know, lucky you, those who don't know what it is a new piece of EU regulation which is directed at corporates. It's hugely complicated. It is going to involve a significant, probably transformational increase in reporting for corporates, but actually most financial institutions also captured, whether you're in the EU or not. So because it involves reporting up and down, it essentially captures the globe. I think everyone's going to be captured in some shape or form, and that's going to be really interesting, just as I know it's a future question, but looking at the US dynamics of that, because there's a lot of US firms who are going to be caught by it. But the point I was going to make is, if that flows out, arguably in 5 years' time, the data that we will have available at our fingertips is going to be transformational. It's going to be significantly different from where we are now, and that's where technology is going to have to come in, because we're going to have so much data we're not going to know what to do with it, and we're going to have to understand how to interpret that data and how to genuinely use that to help us make investment decision making, because actually more data is not necessarily useful unless you know what to do with it and the insights derived from that. But potentially, this is me having a slightly optimistic view of this, I can see a scenario in a few years' time, I won't define few, that actually all these pieces of regulation will finally start to aligning. I mean, arguably from an EU perspective, this has all been done a bit backwards. We should have probably started with CSRD, then done taxonomy, and then done SFDR, so that we can actually invest in the taxonomy using data as provided from CSRD. Unfortunately, it came the other way around.
Or even CS-DDD, maybe, to start
Let's
with.
just chuck that one in.
Another acronym. So just that's just going back to that sort of the harmonisation, I guess, or the coalescing of different terms from different sort of, I guess, professional perspectives. As a sort of fellow sustainability perspective, when we talk about sustainability, we often use the Brundtland definition, which, for those of you who don't know, it's the UN. It's in 1987. The UN set up a commission, basically, which was managed by Brundtland, the Prime Minister of Norway, which defined sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So that is sort of a broad and quite widely accepted definition of sustainability. You compare that to ESG, which is often bandied around sort of as a substitute term. It does create some confusion, I think, as well. So I guess going back to your point around, you know, this misalignment, and going back to some of the issues around ESG being, you know, weaponized, as it's been, you know, termed as well by Larry Fink of BlackRock. Do you think the time is right now to actually ditch ESG as a term and just talk about sustainability?
I think we need to be more precise. I don't think we ditch it, because all that will happen is we'll stop using ESG, we'll use some other word, and then that word will be weaponized. So it's the fundamentals that we need to be getting right. But it plays into the point I was making about that need for precision of language. And I see it internally, I see it in the market, that as I've touched on a couple of times, we all use these words meaning one thing, but they're not necessarily the same thing as you mean by those, and it's really unhelpful. So we are going through a process internally of defining what we mean by ESG, defining what we mean by, so we've kind of got this cascading messaging framework going from sustainability at the top level, which is as you've defined it, but then sustainable investing is a subset of sustainability. And then within that, you've got ESG integration as your first step. That's your minimum level. That's focused purely on financial materiality. Then when you start looking at sustainable funds and sustainable outcomes, that's when you're moving into double materiality. And we're using that, or developing that as a framework to align all our products to all our segregated mandates and all of our output around that hierarchy. We're also looking to change role titles, et cetera, so that we are much clearer about what we mean, so that we stop this. And hopefully the rest of the industry might follow, whether they will or not, I don't know, but it is a real challenge. But I don't think changing the name is going to help. But I think being more precise about what we mean, where we mean it helps. And just on the US point as well, I mean, I personally found if I were speaking to a US colleague, or even particularly when I was more involved with private equity, and I would go and talk about sustainability or ESG, this was before the red and blue kind of issues, but either their eyes would glaze over and they would kind of walk away, or they would get their heckles up. But actually, if I didn't talk about that and I talked about the underlying issues, then I could have a conversation. Yeah. So if you're more careful about the language you use and what's material in that particular conversation, then it's not that anyone has an issue with that. It's that the connotations about ESG or actually probably sustainability having a political agenda behind it is the issue in the US.
Okay, well, let's stick on the US then, and be keen to get your views, and we can talk about the UK new regime, if you want to call it that, in the UK. But maybe just talk a little bit about your views on some of the outcomes, potential, sort of how it's going to play out with Donald Trump administration in the US. As a global investor, you know, you've got myriad of different risks. How do you see it from an Aberdeen's perspective? Yeah,
I mean, the first thing I'd say is it's temporary. It is a period of time, and I think there are some challenges. You know, we can't deny that. Our view is that the US will almost certainly withdraw from COP. They're not going to do it. Well, they've not done it now, but they will. I'm sure they will do it. However, what we do anticipate is that exactly what happened last time will happen again. That a number of states will continue essentially participating at a state level, and then I would imagine, assuming it's a Democratic Party who come in 5 years' time, they go back in again. Now, is that a good thing? No, but at least we're directionally moving in the right direction. And so I think that's one area. I think from the Inflation Reduction Act perspective, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with that. I would imagine Trump would love to roll that back just because it's got Biden attached to it. But actually, given most of the benefit is flowing to red states, I suspect that won't happen. I mean, he's talked about drill, baby, drill, but actually drilling's been going up anyway under Biden. So yes, there'll be more drilling licenses, but it's probably not going to be that different from currently. He's also talked about stopping the EV mandate. I mean, there isn't actually an EV mandate, but that's never stopped Trump. But there is
What specific reference? The importation of Chinese or non-US cars?
We don't obviously exactly know what he means by the EV mandate, but Biden or the current administration have created a more EV-friendly policies and trying to promote adoption and manufacture. So he's talked about rolling that back. I think what's going to be interesting to see is that dynamic with Musk, because clearly he's not going to be wanting that to happen. So it will be interesting to see that interplay, to see what does happen with that EV mandate, if you like. I mean, broadly speaking, we do expect more tariffs going to be attached to clean tech, and then just more broadening it out from sort of the environment, from a nature perspective. He's already made it quite clear he's going to be removing funding from the EPA, so we expect that to be net negative. That even if he doesn't remove the regulation, because there's no one to enforce the regulation, in effect, things will go backwards. And from a social perspective, again, we've already seen, just from an abortion rights perspective, but other aspects, there will be a complete peeling back of labour rights and I suspect a weaponization of DEI as well. That's already happening. There was, I think it was in the press this week, about stopping transgender people using the toilets in the Capitol building. That's just the start of it. So watch this space, but it is temporary.
Okay. Good to know. Right. So let's maybe just focus on the UK now. There's a question here around how are you managing the SDR, which is the Sustainability Disclosure incoming regime in the UK. Do you think we'll achieve wider policy goals or narrowing of the market to the detriment of sustainability and clients? So a bit more focus on the UK now and the proposals from the Labour government there.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I'm trying to think how to answer that without getting myself in trouble. It's been an interesting journey the last year of trying to deal with the SCA and deal with SDR. I think what you will have noticed that there's been a glut of approvals just recently, and there is going to be more to come. And our view is that there has been a shift unofficially in that they've changed the stance. What they were trying to do originally was, as part of the approval process, be really tight on regulating and defining that. They appear to have flipped that round, and they'll catch us on the other side. Okay. So they're basically setting the rules. You go out.
And this for the funds labelling bit.
For the fund, for the fund labelling component of this. So we think there's been a shift in stance. So we're expecting more approvals to come through. As it was before that change, we were looking at about 10 labels, which I don't think anyone would suggest was a success. And that was going to only focus on a very, very small part of the market. And it was very focused on impact labels because they were easier to meet the requirements. Yep. So at that point, I would have said it wasn't a success. However, the change in stance, I think, is probably a positive thing. Yep. And I think if it does become slightly more mainstream, I think it's a positive to allow more guardrails about what we mean by some of these terms. Yep. And I think the really positive thing for me around the SDR versus SFDR is the fact that they have the improvers label. And what I mean by that distinction is from an SFDR perspective, there is no real concept of transition. So you're either sustainable or you're not. From a UK perspective, there is this concept of, improvers. So you can invest in a company that's not performing well today, actively engage with them and have a plan, and then transition to recognise that improvement. I think that's a positive because ultimately we need these companies to transition and improve. We can't be investing in green stock and green buildings. We need to be transitioning and improving them. So that's a positive. So ultimately, I think it's a good thing. Sure.
Okay. Maybe pick up on a couple of these questions from the audience, and we've got 5 minutes left now. So
I never got to use my wand.
You can use your wand at the end to magic anything you want, right? That's your one thing. So we've got a question here around proxy voting to drive sustainable outcomes and ensuring this is aligned with your clients' wishes. Yeah. And I think this is around, for example, Vanguard are now sort of opening the voting at AGMs to their investors, effectively, to give them options around that. Also, let's just wrap in this other question around long-term investment returns. And, can you agree there is a fiduciary duty for investors to influence? So there's a bit of a interplay there between those two questions. Yeah, thanks.
So that first one is exactly what I was talking about earlier, that there is this misalignment, which has been masked by language, and that's starting to become recognised, and Vanguard and others have done exactly that. They've got this kind of twin-track approach where you can actually directly decide how your vote is or your proportion of the vote is allocated and voted. And I think what we do is we do use proxy voters, but we don't follow them blindly. We review that and we'll apply our own view. And actually, when we've had conversations with the US and some of the regulators in the US, that's played out well. Their concern is that you're just blindly following the recommendations of a third party. We're not doing that. We're forming our own view and considering the views of our clients. It does start to become quite challenging, however, though, where if you have multiple clients and some of them are focused on single materiality and some are focused on double, then how do you vote? So I can see a scenario in the future where we are going to have to split our votes and actually say, well, these ones are purely financial and this might be more longer-term societal impact. However, at the moment, they're aligned, and I actually don't think there's that much difference between them. But it's going to be interesting to see if that market starts to evolve and provide more clarity. And then I forgot what the second question was now.
It was around, I think LT means long-term investment returns and acting as a fiduciary.
Yeah, so again, it's absolutely the same thing. And is that the misalignment, or not even misalignment, but the asset owners absolutely are focused on long-term investment, and there almost always is an an element of societal benefit attached to those kind of.
Well, you mentioned societal benefit. Let's pick up that.
Three questions at once.
I know. Let's keep it going, right? So, what's your ranking? I don't quite know what that means, but how do you decide what to prioritise? And maybe the question there is around trade-offs as well. Sort of, you're looking for environmental, social.
I think it's the whole thing of ESG. Is it the E, the S, or the G that you're?
Okay.
E, S, or G? Yeah. And which one?
Yeah. Okay. That's a good question, but I mean, the answer is it depends.
Yeah. Okay.
Really weak answer. Sorry, but it does depend, because you have to assess the material issues for that individual company within that sector, and they will vary. We can't place a stronger emphasis on one or the other. In general, however, the exception to that is that if we have a mandate, which is climate mandate, thematic mandate, we're investing in some kind of energy transition, well, then in which case you are focusing on the E, but obviously there's a minimum floor. So it's similar to the SFDR do no significant harm concept. There's a component where you got to make sure, okay, well, we are focused on the E, but we have to make sure we're not causing harm at the same place, same time. The challenge with that is how far do you take that, because you can do one thing positive and then there's a negative downstream. So it's trying to capture that and weigh all of that up at the same time is still delivering a return. Sure. So it is a balance, and I don't think you should ever completely separate or focus one on the other.
And also, for example, infrastructure projects often have multiple benefits: environmental benefits, societal benefits, local community benefits, etc., etc. So
exactly, and that's where almost, I think, in real assets is where double materiality starts to fall down, because it's really hard to capture that. I mean, you can have a building, you're providing employment in that building, and then there is the knock-on effect of all the surrounding, food suppliers, etc., who are supporting that building and the people in there, which is a societal benefit. That's not what you're intending to do. You might only be focused on the return, but there is a downstream societal benefit associated with your investment. So it is quite hard to draw that line.
Sure. All right, we're just coming to close now, but if there's any burning questions from the audience that didn't go through Slido, very happy to take, there's a mic somewhere, but very happy to take that. Not seeing any, but otherwise there's one there. I don't know if we've got a mic available, or just shout.
I'm trying to do mixed media here, Slido and
I know,
mics.
This is we do have a mic coming, sorry, there's just one coming now. If you just say your name and who you represent. It's just one coming, there you go. Save your voice.
Leandros Kalisperos, West Yorkshire Pension Fund. Dan, I'd just be interested in you fleshing out the earlier thought about, not specifically job profiles per se, but how eventually this team gets set up, under a chief sustainability officer. that balance between needing to control people's workflows and actually ability to advocate and, get things done, versus actually the bigger desire, which is that you want everyone to actually know what they're doing in that space. Just very curious as to, at a high level, how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a challenge. And I mean, it's funny. I mean, like from an organisational perspective, I've reported into about 6 different areas over the time, and had multiple line managers. Whether I currently sit with specifically with an investments and report into CIO, but I've reported everywhere over time. But it is a challenge in terms of getting that structure right. And I think how we're structured is we have a central team, but that is not the sole focus of sustainability. We have a broader, what I've been terming, sustainability ecosystem. So we have individuals sitting within asset class who have a sustainability focus. We have individuals within compliance, within product who have sustainability focus. They don't directly report to me, but they map into me in terms of I do have influence rather than control over what they do. And it's also around having that consistency of messaging. So I've been talking about messaging frameworks, and it's quite helpful. We don't necessarily externalize that, but to make sure we're aligned on our language is really important, so that when our client and distribution teams go out, they're using the same words. So we've kind of structured it around that perspective, around just clarity, but disseminating it as wide as possible. Also backed up with a lot of training. So we do a lot of training, and we continue to do training, both technically, but also on things like language or even anti-greenwashing, those kind of things. It's a constant moving feast, is my summary.
Great, well, thanks, Dan. Just before we wrap up then, I'm going to leave the last word to yourself, Dan, but you've got to pick up the magic wand and you've got to wave it, right? So whatever you want to make right in the world, now's your opportunity, and then we'll break for coffee. Thanks.
So I will actually just magically wave it there, just for completeness. I mean, actually, so if I had 2 asks, one, maybe they're linked actually, but is certainly from a climate change perspective, would be to close the policy gap. There is a gap in terms of the rhetoric and the language we're using, and the reality of the policy. And without policy, we can only go so fast. From our perspective, we have to balance risk return as well. So we have to. I've described it as riding a wave. We have to stay on the front of that wave. If we go too far, we're going to crash and burn and lose our returns. As much as we might want to be going further, we can't. So we have to. And it's the policy that's pushing that wave forward. So we need the policy to move further and faster to allow us to provide the investments. I mean, the current UK government talk about private investment as being this kind of magic wand, but that's only going to happen if the policy framework is receptive. So that would be my ask, would be for policy to catch up with the rhetoric.
Do more surfing. Right.
Do more surfing.
Right, cool. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Dan Grandage.
Thank you.